Expanding Mind with Erik Davis, Thursdays at 2 p.m. on the Progressive Radio Network.
Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Erik Davis, and we're going to continue our exploration into the cultures of consciousness. I think one of the most significant developments in consciousness exploration in the 20th century was the encounter between Western seekers and Eastern paths. Of course, the encounter goes back much farther than that. You know, there's some evidence that even the early Greek philosophers who so, influenced the whole course of Western thought and religion were in dialogue with Indian and other thinkers from the East. So it's an old exchange, but in the 20th century it got taken to a whole new level, and along with the introduction of new concepts, new gods, new practices, new ways of framing the experience of being human in the world in a spiritual way that did not take on the frameworks of Christianity and the Western tradition as much, came a sort of new figure, the guru. Because while, of course, there had been messianic and charismatic leaders all throughout all religious traditions, there's something very specific about the way the guru entered into popular consciousness in the 50s and certainly in the 1960s when the quest for enlightenment went, if not mass cultural, then countercultural. And there began to be a rich, fascinating, funny, bizarre, and in many ways disturbing interrelationship between questing seekers in the West and incoming gurus and their scenes from the East. I mean, the stories of the great gurus of the 60s and 70s of Chogyam Trungpa and Rajneesh and Neem Karoli Baba and Meher Baba, and they're fascinating tales, each one a character in their own right, each one a mixture of light and dark. But wrestling with the guru figure, is the guru necessary? Is it possible to transplant a South Asian tradition into the West? What things happen is one of the more fascinating stories in countercultural or alternative spirituality, I guess you should say, over the last couple of decades. And our guest today has been tracking this for quite a while. Jody Radzik is the fellow behind Guruphiliac, a decidedly controversial website that tracks the ins and outs, ups and certainly downs of the world's gurus then and now, but particularly now. But before I bring on Jody, I'd like to introduce our co-host here on Expanding Mind, Maja Daou, who just you kind of made a splash today here in the LA Weekly, Maja.
They had a little piece on me in the LA Weekly, which it's funny because actually when I was being interviewed with her, she was like, "So are you a guru? Like, do people kind of think of you as a guru, right?" And I was like, "No, I'm definitely not a guru." And that's probably happened to you too, I imagine, Erik. Whenever you speak in front of people on spirituality, there is a tendency for lots of folks to try and like guruize you, even if you're not even trying to be a guru. So
it's true. You stand up there, and I mean, what you do is you give these very, thoughtful, very informative lectures. You're not really even laying out. I mean, you have your opinions about how spirituality works, but you're not really offering some kind of system or particular teaching. And yet, because you have some charisma and you're enjoying yourself up there, but people kind of frame it in this Guruphiliac way.
That's true. Have that happened to you too?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, what I think is an even funnier response though is when I'm talking to people more seriously about saying, hey, this writing and thinking about spirituality as a freelancer is kind of a grueling business, and people have said many times, it's like, yeah, but you got all the elements to have a good cult, man. You should become a guru, then you'll be able to make some change.
It's pretty
and
funny.
I've even thought about it, but it just doesn't work for me. It's just not my path. Well, hopefully to help illuminate some of these questions, we can bring Jody on. I'm hoping you're on. I haven't got the word there. Are you there, Jody?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, I'm here.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us here. So you've been doing, I just want to tell people if they're not familiar with Guruphiliac, it is guruphiliac.blogspot.com, and I like the little the subheader, Revealing Self-Aggrandizement and Superstition in Self-Realization Since 2005. I think that's a good rallying cry. But tell me about why you started the website and what was going on in your life and in your experience in the spiritual scene that set you on this path.
Well, I became active on the internet in the mid-'90s and went right to the news groups that held the most interest for me, which were alt yoga and alt meditation. And Usenet in the 90s was a very contentious place, and I loved being involved in those contentions. I also found a email list called the Non-Duality Salon, and once I got on there, I sort of graduated from Usenet to the Non-Duality Salon, and there I encountered a good number of people, 5 or 6 people that were living in non-dual understanding, what some people would nominally term enlightenment. And it was really an amazing thing because these were normal people with normal lives, nothing like the gurus who were, up until that time, my examples of non-dual realization. So there was a huge gulf between these people on the Non-Duality Salon and the big-time gurus like Amici and Sai Baba, etc. And, it occurred to me that the guru metaphor, as it's the composite metaphor, as it's projected by these big-time gurus, is really a lot more about sales and a lot more about appealing to people's need for self-acceptance and need for comfort and security than it was to help people realize their own non-dual awareness. And it kind of pissed me off a bit. I had a kind of resentment about that fact, and I was working on this criticism of that in the context of the Non-Duality Salon in another email list called Guru Ratings. And I sort of cut my teeth in Guru Ratings and developed my ideas to the point where I started the blog. The blog was really influenced by a blog called Defamer and a blog called Wonkette, which were blogs owned by Gawker. And I just really liked the kind of snarky style and the sort of pop culture, gossip, criticism style of those blogs, and I basically copied them, but applying that style to the culture of gurudom as I see it.
Well, I think that's one of the wonderful things I like about the whole space that's been opened up around that is precisely its willingness to acknowledge that that the search for enlightenment, that spiritual practice, that the heaviest duty spiritual teachings are part of popular culture in the West. They're part of our ordinary space of information and media and memes and practices. And so it's actually, even though it might look, I'm sure more, as is clear, more tender souls take some of your approach to be very harsh and needlessly negative, but to me it's actually rather affirmative because it acknowledges that that this whole search, this whole space, is part of popular culture, and it should be treated as such to some degree. I mean, you mentioned guru ratings, and you go online to Sarlo's guru rating service, which I also love because he's got these little icons, these little like temples to mark the different qualities of the gurus, and it's so funny. It's like a consumer guide, and it's humorous, but it also acknowledges the reality that this material is part of the market. It is part of consumer culture, which doesn't mean it's just consumer objects, but it does mean that that by acknowledging the way that it's part of our whole continuum, we get closer to that very thing that you're talking about, which is to take some of the exotic glean off of the guru and the spiritually realized person and make it part of the possibilities of an ordinary life.
I owe quite a bit to Sarlo because Guruphiliac wouldn't exist without guru ratings, and really, I actually tried to involve Sarlo when I first decided to do the blog, and he's got his hands full with his thing, but he's always been supportive, and we had some wild times in guru ratings. It was sort of the beginning of the end for me, I think, in some ways, but recently it's been difficult to post that Guruphiliac because there's just nothing new to say. It's always the same gripes. These people are presenting an inaccurate and inflated, a fantastical idea of non-dual realization, and that's putting it out of reach for kind of more normal and ordinary people to see. It's as if, if I believe enlightenment makes me an Amici, how am I going to see my own enlightenment if I'm just a busboy or somebody that works at McDonald's or a doctor or, somebody who isn't a goddess who goes around giving magic hugs?
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. Oh, sorry, Eric. I just think it's funny because it's this is an example, okay? Whenever you ask someone, like, if they had past lives or they think they're reincarnated, they'll give the example of always saying, oh, in a past life, I was, Louis the 14th, or it's always like, or I was, a Bodhidharma, or, like, they can't pick a bus boy or like a stable boy. Like, it always has to be some really important, influential character. Like, in their past life, no one was ever a slave or like stuff like that. And I always think of that, I compare it to how the guru mentality is, that in order to be a holy person, you have to be someone important and someone that doles out all of this, knowledge to people. And you can't just be like, in Kung Fu, I think that's very evident, where like a lot of Kung Fu heroes are these like kind of just bus boys or like the Sadhu. They're like regular, normal people. But then in the West, it's become this split where you have to get enlightenment, you have to be like Amici, or you have to be like Sai Baba or some person like that. And if you're not, then you don't count.
Right, you're not going to be recognized. You won't be regarded because you're not exotic and you're not able to offer magic solutions to people's problems. The point you're making really kind of illustrates another fact, I believe, about Enlightenment culture in the West, and that's people get into it because they don't like themselves. They're looking to come up with some self-regard, basically. They've been kind of driven down by their upbringing or the fact that they don't have what they want or they don't have what they think they need, and as a result, a lot of us in the West, I believe, carry self-loathing to various degrees. And so these people are primed to jump into some sort of enlightenment-based spirituality, because enlightenment is the ultimate likability, basically. If you're enlightened, everyone's going to like you because you have something to offer everyone, and that kind of plays into the past lives fantasies of people as well. It's like, okay, well, I'm not very likable right now. I don't have a cool job, and I don't have cool friends. I don't own cool things, but I was really cool in my past life. And so I think that's a really important point, and that's a definite, one of the core components of my critique is that people are getting into enlightenment spirituality not really for enlightenment as it exists, in my opinion. They're getting into it for the benefits of being enlightened as they imagine it.
Right. Well, Jody, I'm curious about you. Is that I think a lot of people maybe go through a phase, especially when they're starting out in spirituality, where there is a period of kind of exoticism, of fantasy, of a kind of storytelling alternative to, like, the world seems dull and gray, and you imagine that there are these wonderful palaces of wisdom and dream powers, and there's a whole kind of exoticism which, when it goes too far, it gets in the way. But maybe initially it's sort of almost like a call, to kind of draw people in. And I'm just curious, in your own experience, when you first started getting into meditation and non-dual awareness and these philosophical ideas, were you sort of drawn into the kinds of let's not say delusions, but the kinds of fantastic thinking and even sort of traps in some ways that now you see as being part of this kind of insidious market? Did you go through a process of awakening to that even within your own search?
Absolutely. My first, quote, religious experience, unquote, was a reaction to a bad acid trip, and but it really was a real experience when I wasn't on drugs, and that caused me to believe in God, basically. It's like, wow, I thought about God, I had this crazy experience, boom, God must be real. So I investigated fundamentalist Christianity because that's all I knew about. I was living in Orange County at the time. And then I got hooked up with this woman that was involved in the Church Universal and Triumphant, which is Elizabeth Clare Prophet's group, who just recently died. She was a lady that bored into a mountain in Montana expecting the end of the world. Maybe that was 10 or 15 years ago. But it was really a kind of modification of theosophy. They were all about ascended masters. This woman, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, channeled any famous deity that you can think of, as well as any famous saint or any famous figure in spirituality. I started reading some of the Foundation's books and doing their practices, and I was having experiences that were matching the practices. So, of course, I thought, I must be some really important person in my past life, and I really started to get into it, and then I asked somebody at that organization about reggae music because I was really enjoying reggae music at the time, and they said, "Oh, reggae music is bad. It's from the jungle. It's of the devil." And right away, I knew it was all BS, at least their ideological stance, because I loved reggae music, and it seemed harmless to me. So at that
That's
point,
so funny, man. That cracks me up. That's just like an experience I had when I tried desperately to be a born-again Christian when I was 16 years old, and it worked out for a while. It was actually probably a good thing for me to happen in retrospect. I certainly learned my Bible, and I was in a really weird place when I got into it that was probably good to kind of clean out the system a little bit. But that was the turning point for me too. I was hanging out, and then I was talking about some Peter Gabriel video that I'd seen that I was totally into, and they were like, "That's the devil. He uses African witchcraft imagery," and I was like, "These guys are crazy."
And racist. It's totally racist. To associate it with Africa and African culture. So, I dropped out of the Elizabeth Clare Prophet thing and felt guilty about it, though, because I had these very real experiences, for me, very real subjective experiences in the context of the practices she was giving. And so I really thought I was maybe stepping away from something that I shouldn't. But then I encountered Alan Watts, and I read Alan Watts' Psychotherapy East and West, and that put me on a whole new program, which was to become a transpersonal psychologist. Mm-hmm. And so I went to UCI and accosted a transpersonal psychologist there to give me advice, and decided to go to JFK. I joined a yoga ashram that was based in Costa Mesa and went to live at their facility on Palomar Mountain in rural San Diego. After a year, I was signed up for 2 years. After a year, I left because, I had a critical perspective on what was happening in that organization. And those kinds of organizations just can't broke a critical perspective. So I left, again feeling guilty and like I was walking away from my spiritual truth, and they were telling me I was going to have a million past lives before I was going to come to realization. And but then I moved up here to go to John F. Kennedy University, got interested in parapsychology, actually in response to Shirley MacLaine's movie Out on a Limb and how horrible I thought that presentation was. But after a while looking at parapsychology, I realized, you know what? There's not a lot going on here. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens to people, but they sure can't get it to work in the lab. And then at that point, I turned a little bit more skeptical, and it's only recently that I'm turning back from my skepticism of the paranormal.
Well, yeah, that's another topic, but I want to focus in on how you see or have come to see non-dual realization as sort of our way of focusing this much larger and more amorphous idea of enlightenment as and how, because it does seem to be that there's some movement, there's some change around how that gets framed, and there's kind of a new way of presenting that as a more or not a new way, but a fresher way of presenting it as a very ordinary state. But could you just talk a little bit about how you see that as being the kind of goal, if you will, of enlightenment practice?
Sure. My tradition, the tradition I'm initiated in, is Vedanta. So my perspective is more kind of tuned to that. Basically, I think what Vedanta says is we're all the Atman, and the Atman is primordial awareness that is not modified by attachment to consciousness. It's pure awareness, you could call it, and that's the foundational awareness that every human being shares. And so what non-dual realization is a moment where that becomes apparent, and it becomes apparent permanently. It's not a glimpse. People talk about glimpses. I don't necessarily believe in glimpses. I really think it's a condition, but it's not an experience. And as soon as we start talking about it, we're talking about it right now. And so it's something that really can't be talked about. And that's not because it's too big to talk about it or too small. It's just that awareness in and of itself, primordial awareness, is not a sense object. And so our minds are completely wrapped around the concept of sense objects, and non-dual awareness isn't that. But it's always there in each person at all times, no matter what they're doing. So it's an ordinary thing. Everyone has it. Everyone carries it. It's always here. To see it, to have that kind of recognition occur, doesn't really change anything, except the fact that you can see it. And that's a good thing to see it, because it kind of sets up a new platform for your identity. And from that new platform, you can do some good transformational work. But what it isn't are all the things that these big-time gurus are telling you that it is, basically, and a lot of Hinduism, to be honest. I can't really. It's not so much the big-time gurus. It's Hinduism in general. Hinduism has fetishized and reified non-dual realization to the point where it's basically out of our reach. And to me, that's the problem. If it's something that's with us at all times, then it should be normal and ordinary. And if I'm making it this super exotic, extraordinary thing at the top of Mount Himalaya, if I'm making it that, how am I ever going to see something that's with me right now? Does that mean I have to become something completely different? I don't think so. If it's with me right now, I should be able to know it as I am right now, with maybe a little bit of meditation and a proper psychological approach.
Great. Well, we're going to take a break right here. You're listening to Expanding Mind, and Maja and I are talking to Jody Radzik, the maestro of Guruphiliac, and when we come back, we'll talk more about contemporary gurus.
This is PRN, Progressive Radio Network.
Thoughtful, provocative, cutting edge. The Ask Dr. Eisenstein Show. Other doctors will scare you of the disease. Dr. Eisenstein will scare you of their treatment. Dr. Eisenstein is a practicing physician for almost 40 years and graduate of several prestigious medical schools. Since 1973, he has been the medical director of Home First Health Services in Chicago. The majority of the 23,000 families in this practice deliver their babies at home, breastfeed their children, choose not to vaccinate, and use natural treatments whenever possible.
Hi, I am Dr. Mayer Eisenstein. If you want to hear the other side of the story, tune in every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for an hour of questions, answers, and lively discussion. Call me with your medical questions. I would love to talk with you.
The Progressive Radio Network is the home for progressive minds. It's the place where progressives get together to discuss important topics with informed opinions, minus the agenda. PRN is the place for fresh, stimulating, commercial-free radio content from leading progressives all over the world every day. The Progressive Radio Network, making the world a more informed place, one mind at a time.
This Friday on Wiley and Sage, Love, Lust, and Laughter, one of the nicest, sexiest, funny, smart, and talented American icons ever, Barbie Benton. Singer, musician, comedian, Hugh Hefner's girlfriend, star of Hee Haw. It's hard to think of something Barbie hasn't accomplished. And especially if you're an American male baby boomer, tune in. Barbie's as sweet as ever and a good friend of Dr. Diana's. That's Love, Lust, and Laughter with special guest Barbie Benton. This Friday at 6 p.m. on the Progressive Radio Network.
You are listening to Progressive Radio Network.
Welcome back to Expanding Mind on the Progressive Radio Network. Erik Davis, myself, Majidau, are talking to Jody Radzik about gurus. And Jody, I wanted to ask you about one of your favorite gurus, but I wanted to just point out that, you know, what you were saying with non-dual realization, I totally agree with all of that. And to me, it's very alchemical. It's, you know, it's the realization of the opposites in every moment of every normal, stupid, mundane thing you're doing, from tying your shoe to doing the dishes, which is one of the reasons why I like Zen traditions like Alan Watts and Thich Nhat Hanh, because they see it as something that happens always, everywhere, part of everything. And it's funny because the word guru actually literally means light and dark. The two components of the word mean light and dark, which is like that yin-yang, you know, alchemical opposites, that realization of the dualities into non-dualities. But what ends up happening with most gurus, not all, but many, they end up separating everything into light. Like there's all this in the West, like everything is about light and being light and light beings, and there's no dark component. Like the tantric aspects are all eradicated out of it, and you have to be holier than thou to be part of the guru society. And in a way, they elevate themselves like priests in a church, because they're the only ones that can like access that holiness and no one else can, and all the regular dirty things that we do every day. So I was just curious if you had if you could give us an example of maybe some guru in the West that you have found that truly realizes that non-duality, that can include the light and dark aspects of the guru.
You know, you gave me this great idea, guru as the light pusher, like a drug pusher, but the light pusher, right? And the light is a metaphor for the guru's magic. You know, the idea that enlightenment can be transmitted like radio waves, I'm critical of that idea. That isn't to say that there isn't something that happens, that there isn't a social component to a guru-chela relationship, a guru-student relationship, but I think generally, most of the time, it's really more of a matter of suggestion and priming, that if you're going to Amachi for a hug and you believe Amachi is God, then automatically you assume Amachi has all the powers that you imagine God has. Therefore, you've primed yourself to have some kind of experience when you get that hug, and many people do. And that's a good thing for those people. I mean, Amachi's going around and hugging people isn't a bad thing. I think people really take some solace from that. It helps them in the problems of their life. But are they closer to non-dual realization because they got this hug? I don't necessarily think so. And I think maybe they're a little further away because now they're associating non-dual realization with being a goddess up on a pedestal. I talk about the pedestal all the time, that a real good guru doesn't stand on a pedestal. Now, you guys were talking about the pedestalization process, how that's inherent in the action of standing up on a stage giving talks about spirituality. But you guys sound like you're doing the right things, which is stepping off that pedestal. Hey, I'm just somebody that likes these things and likes talking about these things, but I'm not special in any way because of that. And for me, that's a really great example of the guru. I took initiation from a Swami, a very low-key, just kind of minding his own business type person. And to me, he's a perfect example for a guru because he basically gave me the initiation and he just let Kundalini do the rest. And she really swatted me around for a while. A famous person in the West who's functioning as a guru, I'm not really super familiar with him, but Adyashanti seems pretty okay. I mean, he wears robes and he's kind of up there, and sure, people are putting him on a pedestal, but he seems to be aware of that, and he seems to be at least making some attempts to mitigate that process as it occurs. Who else? To be honest, and this is. It's distressing,
but something else is happening too, where you have not just like even outside, like we're so used to thinking of like, okay, if something's happening spiritually, if there's somebody who's putting out good information, then they're a teacher, and that they're at some level, maybe they're good at being a teacher because they're kind of humble, or they're funny, or they're bad at being a teacher. But it also seems like there's some even more kind of appropriately contemporary, like open source approach to these things, websites, people talking to each other, a kind of culture of like, you'd almost want to say rather than student-teacher, but more like spiritual friends, like people just kind of helping each other along, and then somewhere along that way, some people get a certain kind of realization, and then they're like, whoa, I'm here. Hey, what about this? I mean, I'm thinking about the website like Open Enlightenment, which are these like guys who are like practiced Western occult magic, and then stumbled on certain states of mind that they think are enlightenment states. Whether they've achieved quote unquote full non-dual realization, almost doesn't matter. But it's almost more a way of approaching it, more like the way that you would talk to a friend who's been to a country that you haven't been to, rather than even thinking that they're a teacher.
Yeah, I like the Open Enlightenment website. I like those guys. I've had some discussions with them. I don't necessarily accept all the magic stuff so much, but there's a lot of people on that level that are out there with good information, as you've observed, Erik. There's Greg Good. His website is called I can't remember it. But he wrote a short article called Age of the Friend, basically, where he talks about the guru role shifting from a kind of top-down hierarchical thing to more of a, networked, everyone's on the same level thing. And like you said, just friends helping friends. These folks I've met on Twitter and in Guru Ratings and in the Non-Duality Salon I believe they're all qualified to give good advice about non-dual awareness. There's a guy named Chuck Hillig out there. There's a woman here in the Bay Area, Olga Luchikova. These people aren't necessarily super available, but there are people. And Twitter, I've met some really great minds, realizers, I would call them, on Twitter, who, they're just doing what they do to pay their bills, and they get on Twitter and they put some really good stuff out there. And so, I think you're right, Eric. This is a burgeoning movement of people that are coming to non-dual understanding, but they're not going to go the guru route, and for various reasons, but I think they're all good reasons, because it makes the information more available, and it makes non-dual realization more available, because you're seeing it from somebody you might be sitting next to on the bus, rather than somebody you're going to see in an auditorium from half a mile back in front of thousands of people.
Right. Well, here's another question for you. Since obviously we went a little bit into the talking about non-dual zone, and as you know, anytime you do that, things get very tricky and meta and recursive and sort of sometimes seemingly tedious. It's a difficult thing to do. After looking at this stuff for so long, do you think that really talking about it, that trading ideas, that meditating even with the intent of achieving it, that is there any way to sort of like get there quicker? Is there a trick, or at certain points you just stop trying and maybe it looks that way and maybe it doesn't? I mean, how have you come to it after all these years?
Well, I have a friend, Steve Sashin, who I regard as a qualified person, who has some short process that he takes people through, and he seems to feel that it brings them to a point where at least they can kind of understand the non-conceptual nature of non-dual awareness. But I'm initiated in the lineage of Ramakrishna, and Ramakrishna said something that always really stuck with me, and that's bhakti is the easiest path. And I think he said that for various reasons, but one of the reasons was a bhakta isn't necessarily thinking about non-dual realization. A bhakta is just going for a kind of state of surrender or state of devotion. And this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with non-dual realization conceptually. There's a lot of what they call the Neo-Advaita teachers who kind of say the same thing, give up the search. And then there's a huge reaction to that. Oh, well, you can't give up. You must do something. And people go back and forth all the time about this. I see the value in giving up the search, because if you give up the search, non-dual awareness ceases to be an object. It's objectifying non-dual awareness. Immediately, you've just occluded non-dual awareness, because it becomes a metaphor in your mind that kind of sits in front of the actual light of non-dual awareness, to call it that. Now I've just used the metaphor light. Oh, it's something bright and shining in me that I can see. Boom. I just scotched that whole little discussion basically by calling it light. So the idea of giving up the search isn't a bad idea, but that doesn't mean to not have effort. Meditation is a good thing regardless of why you're doing it. I believe meditation is a good thing. I believe that it brings some calm to your mind. It allows you to stop and consider things before immediately reacting to them. I would say meditation makes you a better person. So meditate for those reasons, not to come to this objectified, reified state that you're believing in. Because just by believing in it and making it an object, you're probably preventing yourself from seeing it.
Well, and that's such a big thing because, like I was talking about earlier, people have an idea of what holiness is, and it prevents them from becoming it because they are never holy. And when you have an idea that holiness is this light thing, that you can't be bad, and in Christianity you can see it right with people who sin, and they can't accept their state of being as holy and enlightened because they have all this dirt and crap associated with them that they don't put under that parameter, so they're not even able to attain a state of enlightenment because they're searching for something which does not include the state of where they are at that moment, which is, like, basically, from what I understand, enlightenment, when you can be in a moment and experience that. But if you can't integrate all those parts of yourself, it stops you from doing it. So when you chase after that idea of the holy, to put it in Led Zeppelin terms, you just can't, you'll never get there.
Absolutely. You know, we could go a couple different ways from here, but the metaphor of holiness and the metaphor of the saint, huge occluding factors in Enlightenment culture. They're not helping people, in my opinion. They're just preventing people from seeing who they are themselves right now. But there's also this idea of the light and the dark. You know, we got into the idea of guru, the definition of guru. I've heard it as the speller of darkness. And these big-time gurus are selling you light. They want you to feel good all the time. Really, what they're encouraging you to do is run from your shadow. And the fact is, that's where the action is. I mean, basically, that's what Dzogchen says, and that's been my experience. You can't run from your shadow. You got to jump right into your shadow. You really have to turn around, make yourself a science project, learn as much as you can about your inner workings, and to fearlessly dive deep into your ickiest, yuckiest, cruddiest stuff. And it doesn't mean it's going to go away either. It isn't like, oh, we can clean all that shadow out and we'll be pure and clear and stainless like a saint. No. But as you become aware of your shadow and you can kind of reclaim those areas of your psyche and as a result sort of not be affected by them the way you were when you were in denial of them and repressing them. And you know, so much of Enlightenment culture as it exists in the West is about running from the shadow. And really, along with so many things in Enlightenment culture, it is the absolute opposite of what you should be doing, in my opinion.
I think another way of approaching that is non-dualism. If you take it to have, you know, I mean, again, we're going to get into the weird loops, but where it's not about any particular qualification. There is a sort of vast, unmarked field of suchness that individual objects arise, they have their qualities, but what we're talking about with non-dual conception is not that. It's not the arisal of lots of things that have differences in them. So one aspect, one way of understanding a little bit, I think, about non-dual experience is that it has something to do with equanimity. It has something to do with this idea of one taste, that whatever's arising, there's some continuity there that doesn't have to do with its particular qualities. So when you're talking about the shadow, it's not just that the shadow has the juicy stuff. It's that as we learn to look and embrace the hardest things in our lives, in looking in the world, but also in ourselves, and developing a space where they can just be. You can think of it as compassion, but you can also think of it as a science project, but just developing a space where it just is, that over time, I think we get in the habit even of just not turning away from whatever's happening. And then there's sort of a space to just let whatever's happening happen, which includes very dualistic experiences like, oh my God, I want that cheeseburger so bad right now, or you know, or spiritual experiences, or even experiences of fantasy and wonder, like, wow, I'm imagining this wonderful Himalayan kingdom right now where there are holy people on it, and it's a wonderful fantasy, and I'm even experiencing these emotions, and maybe I see colored lights. I mean, that's kind of cool, but we create a deeper, almost unmarked environment where all those things happen, and there's a relationship between that state of equanimity, I think, and a more profound, fully realized kind of non-dual understanding. So it's another reason to just be able to go in and be with the shadow.
Yeah, you just described a great practice, basically, and I'd have to agree with that. Non-dual awareness, as it's known, the way I understand it, you can't hang anything on it. You can't hang good on it. You can't hang bad on it. You can't hang hot or cold or pleasant or painful. You just can't hang anything on it. And I think that's where this idea of equanimity comes from, is that aspect, that kind of feature or lack of features of it. So, non-dual realization is really only the beginning. I like to say realization comes, enlightenment follows, that there's a process after non-dual realization, and I think that's where a lot of enlightenment culture gets it way wrong, because people operate under this assumption that, okay, with non-dual realization, my mind is going to be wiped clean, basically. It's like I'm going to get a format on my hard drive, and then everything is going to be different, right? But, I mean, neurobiologically, we know that's not really possible, or super duper rare, and would probably be regarded as pathological. I think with non-dual realization, there is an ongoing recognition of pure awareness in the context of your life as an individual, and that recognition begins to work on you. And the more you can kind of focus on that and concentrate on that and meditate on that, the more enlightened you will become. But it's a process that takes years. It isn't instantaneous. Non-dual realization is instantaneous. I think it's like, oh, whoa, there it is. But the process
It's so important that you said it's a process, because that in the West we have this idea that you're enlightened and then that's it. Like you made it, you did it. You don't ever have to do anything again. Like everything you do after that is perfect and holy. But they forget that it is a process of every day, and that every event that happens after you're enlightened only becomes more difficult because you're excruciatingly aware and conscious of everything. And in a lot of Judaism, they have this thing that the rabbis say, that the brighter your light, the bigger the shadow. And that it actually gets more difficult after enlightenment, because you have to wrestle with your shadow more constantly every day, because you are more conscious of it and you attract more bigger energy. So then the shadow things, when you face your shadow every day, it's hard to face your shadow every day. Nobody wants to do that. And once you have enlightenment and that kind of consciousness, and you do like a little relapse, it can be really brutal. Like there's all kinds of stories of what happens to like kind of enlightened folks once they like kind of step off the wagon or whatever and stop doing that battle, that then like all these crises happen. And it happens to Buddha too. Like in the story of Buddha's life, there's lots of examples of terrible things that happen to him after he gets enlightenment. And I think in the West we never talk about all those terrible things that happen after enlightenment.
Well, but there is the idea of the fallen guru, which pops up all the time for me. A very famous guru in India who has actually, had some pretty good traction here in the States, Swami Nityananda. He was the bright light. He was the really, up-and-coming, big-time guru. And, he got caught on a sex tape with an actress. And then it came out that he was basically, having people go into the groups that were coming to hear him talk and fish out the attractive women. And then they'd get him in the back, he'd have him sign an NDA, and then it was on. The Tantra was on at that point. So, he went from top of the heap pretty much down to the bottom of the pit, and it reigns. He's in jail or he's under indictment in India for some silly things. I don't necessarily agree with some of the laws in India regarding religion, but the fact is he was presenting himself as this pure, stainless, holy sadhu, when in fact he was just like one of the guys getting it on with
here's the question for
he
you.
Could get it on with.
Right. That's the obvious interpretation, and I'm not saying it's wrong. That's the one that my mind first went to. But then there's a second moment where I go, but is it also the case that reflects the way that we haven't learned how to integrate sexuality into genuine realization? Like maybe he wasn't handling it well, that's certainly clear. But maybe the connections with the women was not just like a cheesy exploitation thing. Maybe there was something really, really happening there. There was a real connect. I mean, it doesn't quite make sense why they have to be babes, but you get the point of my question.
I absolutely do. That points to the process of magic gurudom. And I'm not necessarily being critical when I say magic gurudom because it's a psychological process. So to take Nityananda for an example, he finds some young woman and, he has her come back and he tells her, look, we're going to have sex and this is going to spiritually empower you, right? Well, she could very well be spiritually empowered by that experience because she believes she's going to be spiritually powered by that experience.
It's like a different kind of Amici hug.
Yeah. Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And you know what? It works. I say all the time, really bad gurus can be really great for the right people. And it's really what you bring to it. Gurus in that regard, they function as Ishtadevatas. I'm a Kali devotee. I have a photograph of a painting of Kali, and that's basically the center of my devotional life. Gurus are the same exact thing to my mind, these big-time gurus. They're functioning as living Ishtadevatas, right? Now, I can't have sex with this photograph of a painting I have on my altar, but the same kinds of empowerment can come through that photograph because it's me, it's Jody, and Jody's subconscious that's kind of working with those elements to produce transformation. So getting back to Erik, gurus are allowed to have sex in my book, but it needs to be above the table, and it needs to, it's like sex with your psychiatrist, right? It's against the law in California. There's this power dynamic that comes into play that can be damaging. But a lot of the women that Nityananda's been with, some of them may have been completely empowered by that experience, and it's only been good for them. And now others may not have been empowered by that experience, and they might feel used, and they might be damaged. So it's a double-edged sword, and it'll probably go either way. But had Nityananda said, look, I'm not a pure holy sadhu. I'm just a guy. I have desires like regular people. That's another truth about non-dual realization. It is not the cessation of desire. If you look at any big-time guru who is allegedly enlightened, they're full of desires. Ramakrishna, he liked all kinds of stuff, different kinds of candy, different kinds of music. So,
and he was upfront about it, and that's so the key is just being upfront about it and saying, yeah, I think sex is sacred, and this is like my deal. But instead, they have to pretend it's not there and then do it in secret.
Right, and then boom, boy, did he fall. I mean, he fell from thousands of feet. Boom, he grounded without a parachute. And to tell you the truth, I feel a little bad for the guy because other than the fact that he was a miracle monger, which really annoyed me and caused me to criticize him on my blog, he could have been a contender. He could have shown the world that, yeah, I'm this guy that has enlightenment, but you know what? I'm a regular guy too. And that would have been a much more important example than the big-time guru route that he went, where he started miracle mongering and he was up on the pedestal. He had these gold thrones made for him. So really, it was a great opportunity for the world, and he just went the route of all these other big-time gurus. He got caught up in the narcissism of it. He got caught up in the adoration, and the world loses another chance to have a good example.
And I think another problem there too, and we only have a couple of minutes here left, but it's just that that the very kind of criticism that you're doing, that we're talking about here, is not been integrated into the process, and it should be. That it's not that the gurus are wrong, it's not that the whole thing is corrupt, it's that you need to have critical discourse and ideas and controversy and a truth-telling in the midst of the Enlightenment culture, whereas like you say, what happens a lot of the time, still, less so than in the 70s, I think, but still very much today, is that people want it as a kind of escapism, so that the idea of being critical, and you've received a lot of negative feedback for your site, and it's actually, you've kind of taken it on. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, to get to blow people's ideas and have them get angry in a spiritual context, and that's a lot of difficult stuff. But I think what you're doing, other people, and even the kind of conversations we're trying to have on this show, is to create a space for genuine critical engagement with these things, but not in an attempt to just tear it all down, but to renovate it, to let it evolve.
I am not trying to tear anything down. I'm constantly trying to make that point clear. I consider myself an insider. I'm not some evangelical preacher that's trying to destroy Hinduism. Really, we just need to look at these things. The primary problem, in my view, is metaphor. That the body is grounded in metaphor, and
we need better metaphors. Jody, I got to cut you off right there. Thank you so much for being on the show. Guruphiliac is the blog. This is Erik Davis. You've been listening to Expanding Minds, and check out our archive on progressiveradionetwork.com. Keep your minds open.